How do I turn this on?
Yep, just press the top one, just press that one time and
Okay.
it'll be green and then you'll go.
Okay.
I'll do a quick intro and we'll be good. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in today on our Wednesday edition of Books Sandwiched In. We're glad everyone could make it and got the snow brushed off their cars so they could be here with us. I'm Dina Viviani, the programming librarian here at BML. Just to start with a few housekeeping announcements. First, if there is a need to evacuate the building, the door on my right, your left, is our closest exit. For anyone using a hearing aid, please take advantage of our induction loop system. It amplifies all sound coming through the microphone. And along those lines, when we have time for Q&A, please wait for this microphone to reach you so that everyone can hear and participate. Please silence or turn off your cell phones now so as not to disrupt the speaker. And we'd like to thank the Friends of Brighton Memorial Library for sponsoring this program and our entire series. We still have a few months to go. We have BSI flyers in the back. We've got no copies of Berry Pickers. Berry Pickers is our pick for next month, but you can put a hold on it at the info desk when you leave if you're interested. And we do have the copy of the book about the Met, where we'll have Grant Holcomb presenting in May, and then June, and then we're already reading for our next season. All right. So our speaker, Michael Dobrowski, he has been here before. We're happy to have him back again. He teaches Thursdays, I believe, which is why he is here on a Wednesday, and we are glad that he could take his day off from that part of his schedule to be here. He is the chair of Holocaust Studies and professor of religious studies at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, where he joined the faculty in 1976. His degrees are all from New York University, and he's the author of numerous books and articles. And whenever we have a professor here, I like to make sure that I pull some very important information from ratemyprofessor.com. So somebody says, just in this December, I've learned so much because of Dr. Dobrowski. His classes are very informative and interesting. He also genuinely cares and makes an effort to remember certain facts about his students. Very little graded work, but the reading is heavy. If you can read a lot, then you'll really enjoy his classes. And then this one went back from a few years ago. He literally brought us in his wife's homemade banana bread. Such a nugget. 100% would take his classes again. With that, here's Mr. Dobrowski.
Thank you. Yeah, I had forgotten about the banana bread, actually. Okay, good afternoon. Nice to see everyone here. First of all, how many of you have read the novel? Oh, almost everyone. Okay. So this is always, for me, a challenge to talk about fiction relating to the Holocaust. It's a big topic for those of us who teach the Holocaust and those of us who sort of immerse ourselves in the subject matter. And there isn't one mind on this particular issue. Some people feel that it's actually literature and good literature that can draw people in to a subject matter, that can explore emotional, psychological, sort of deep kinds of questions, as opposed to sort of history, the kind of things that I do typically or that I read, that deal with events and documentation of events and try to be as truthful and as objective as possible. So I find it actually a challenge. So what I think I'm going to try to do, or hopefully do, is be true to the book and give you my honest opinion. I'm going to tell you my honest opinion right from the start. I didn't like the book. Why don't we get right to it? I didn't like it. There were large parts of the narrative of the story that concerned me. Errors in historical fact that I think are actually not excusable. I may point out a couple of those. And I would say that the whole premise of the book and the narrator of the book, the narrator being truth, disturbed me and in some ways deeply disturbed me. So if we go almost to the very beginning of the book, page 7, the narrator, who is truth, tells us you can trust the story you're about to hear. You can trust it because I'm telling it to you. And I'm the only thing in this world you can trust. So truth, as the narrator, is telling us we can trust the story. We can trust the truth claims of this story. And we don't have to worry about it. Whatever is in here is true. Well, that's not true, actually. That's quite ironic. It's not true. There are a lot of things in this book that are not true, that are fabrications, that are attempts by the author to imagine things that may have occurred on some level. So as a historian and as somebody who cares a lot about the distortion of truth, and I would say, actually, not to be terribly political, in the world in which we live, that we've lived in the past couple of years, the very concept of truth is under attack. On university campuses, the very concept of truth is under attack. We don't talk about, many people don't talk about objective truth anymore. There isn't objective truth. Many people challenge the very concept of objective truth. And here we have a fable, a story, which is based on truth. There is truth in it, but does it really get to the essence, actually, of the experience? And does it potentially give a kind of false understanding of what occurred? Now, on some levels, I like the idea that the exploration by Mitch Albom of the exploration of the very concept of truth and whether under certain circumstances we bend the truth or we actually tell lies, and the exploration of the idea of whether it's in fact, under certain circumstances, a good idea to tell lies. So I've been thinking about that question for a long time, actually. I actually went back to my some of the published opinion pieces I used to write for the Democrat and Chronicle when they used to publish. And I actually wrote 2 pieces about 10 or 15 years ago on lying. And I was actually exploring why we get, many of us sort of get bent out of shape when we catch public figures in a lie, and we become kind of very judgmental about it, and the assumption is that we don't lie. And the argument I was making in those short pieces is we all lie. We all lie all the time. We lie to ourselves. Some of us are in professions based on lies. I hope I'm not offending any people in advertising here, or politics, or even academics. And sometimes lies are a good thing. We talk about little lies and white lies and lies to protect people from pain or from some truth that might hurt them. We do that. And, in philosophy, it's a big question. Is it ever appropriate, in a theoretical sense, to lie? And some philosophers would argue, no, it's never appropriate. You should always tell the truth. And others would argue, well, no, there's certain circumstances. I don't have to go into specifics here, but, let's say people are approaching the end of life and so forth, and there's nothing much that can be done, and what is the benefit of telling them what is about to happen to them within days or not, that kind of thing. So people have different opinions about it. So my general approach, my general evaluation of the book is not a very positive one. Now, who's Mitch Albom? I mean, who's Michael Dobrowski? Michael Dobrowski is not an author who sells millions of copies of books. Mitch Albom has written lots of books. Probably some of you may have heard him when he came here 2 or 3 years ago to speak, or 2 years ago at Brighton High School. I don't know. He's written some books that I think are very, very worthwhile. Obviously, Tuesday with Morrie, other books. As we're approaching the Super Bowl on Sunday, I kind of remember, this is another one of his careers, watching Mitch Albom Sunday mornings before NFL football games. He was on an NFL commentator show before games. So he has a lot of different interests. Is Mitch Albom, is it appropriate for Mitch Albom to write a book on the Holocaust? What the hell does he know about the Holocaust? He tells us that he knows what he knows, what triggered this book. Did I just say hell? I didn't mean to. I'm not that angry, actually. Just a little bit angry. What does he know? But the more fundamental question is this: who has the right to tell this story? Do we privilege certain people who have the right to tell this story, and other people cannot tell this story? Do you have to have a personal connection? Is it an advantage to have a personal connection? Is it a disadvantage to have a personal connection? Sort of this insider-outsider question that lots of people always talk about. I think we can make arguments on either side of that, right? So when reading the last couple of pages of the book, and when Mitch Albom tells us where he got the information from, I get a little nervous when you have a whole, what he calls his team. You have a whole team of people doing research for him, telling him the facts, and he's doing the writing. I mean, that's not the way I operate. That's not the way historians operate. So I'm giving you my bias up front. Now, if we talk about the story itself, I have problems with the way he tells the story itself. I find it very shallow. I find it very one-dimensional. I don't find that there's character development. I don't know these characters. I know what he tells us about Nico and Sebastian and Fanny, the main characters, even the Nazi killer Udo Graf. I know what he tells us about them, but I find it very thin and very shallow. I don't find that he develops the characters. He tells. He doesn't show. I'm not a writer of fiction, but I've tried to write fiction, and a very smart editor once said about something that I had written, it's an interesting story, but your problem is you tell, you don't show. Let the reader figure it out. He's presenting moral dilemmas, lying, responsibility, guilt, redemption, big questions, right? These are big questions. We face them in our everyday lives, and certainly people faced them 80 years ago. These are big questions, and I think it's important that he raises those questions. It's important that he tries to tell a story that pulls those questions out of the history in some ways. But I just wonder if it's all sort of contrived and predictable. I don't feel like I know any of these characters. I don't feel like I know Nico. I don't feel like I know his brother Sebastian. I don't feel like I know them. So that's, for me, also a problem with a book like this. To get back to the question, who has the right to tell the story? Well, I don't agree with, by the way, I noticed the other day that Marion Wiesel passed away, Elie Wiesel's wife, at, I think she was 92 or maybe 94. I'm not necessarily agreeing with the position that someone like Elie Wiesel took, where he, in a number of different places, sort of famously said, unless you were there, unless you were in Auschwitz, unless you came out of the ashes of Birkenau, you don't know what happened there. And you don't have the right to tell the story. Or I think of the great writer Primo Levi, that some of you may have read in any number of books. Is This a Man? Primo Levi was there, and Primo Levi writes about even those people who were there. The only thing that they can really write about is their own personal experiences, what they saw, what they witnessed, what they lived through. They can't really speak for others. And he reminds us that most of the knowledge that we have about the Holocaust that comes from survivors, we have, of course, lots of other different kinds of knowledge that comes from documents and films, even films taken by the Nazis. We have lots of information, but the information that we derive from survivors, Primo Levi reminds us, only comes from a very small segment of the survivor community, because there was only a very small percentage of survivors who survived. The overwhelming majority of the victims did not survive. They also have stories. They also had experiences. We'll never hear them. We'll never hear those stories. So we need to be careful, Primo Levi reminds us, and this is someone who was there. We need to be careful about generalizations we make, because what we're hearing are stories from people, one, who survived, two, who could speak or who wanted to speak. And then also, all of us are inevitably subject to the problem of memory itself. What do we remember? How can we actually be sure that what occurred to us or what we remember is actually what occurred to us? So for me, these are big questions. Maybe not for maybe not for the average reader. Maybe, and I'm really interested in what your take, those of you who've read the book, what your take is. But for me, these are big questions, and I think he falls short in these big questions. And then if we look specifically at the community that he's focusing on, it's very important to focus on the community of Salonika, the 50,000 plus Jews who were deported from that Greek city, from that Greek Macedonian port city, a very, very important Sephardic Jewish community in Greece. Most of those Jews who were deported beginning in February of 1943, February 24th, I think, of 1943, and they began to arrive in Auschwitz a couple of weeks later, in March and in August. Overwhelmingly, the overwhelming majority of those Jews of Salonika were gassed on the day they arrived. Actually, Primo Levi tells us a little bit about that. One of the characters, or two of the characters that he writes about in a number of his books, were from Salonika and were Greek Jews. And he has some things to say about Greek Jews because they had a similar problem to Italian Jews who were forcefully deported to Auschwitz. They didn't speak Yiddish. The overwhelming majority of the Jews who were taken to the killing camps were Yiddish speakers. So if you're an Italian Jew who speaks Italian, or a Greek Jew who speaks Greek or Ladino, you not only had, you had layers and levels of obstacles that you had to confront, that you had to kind of figure out, because you didn't even have a common language. So he feels some affinity to the Greek Jews that he met and the Jews from Salonika. I don't know. I didn't feel like I understood. I mean, he uses the words, he tells us. The trains, they left, you know, the Liberty Square where the railroad was, they went to Auschwitz, they were taken off, they were gassed. I don't feel like I'm learning anything beyond those kinds of descriptions. There was a whole history to that community, a rich history. Some of that does come through in the early parts of the book, but I didn't feel like he adequately captured that, you know, sort of in my opinion. And then the rest of the story, you know, Nico trying to make up for the lie. Here is this character who's described as a boy who never lied, and he's manipulated and used by Udo Graf, the Nazi fictional character, responsible for deporting the Jews of Salonika. Just tell the Jews that everything's going to be fine. They're going on trains. They're going to the east. They're going to work. Everything's going to be fine. And you know, he, you know, as described, is a boy who never lied and suddenly tells this lie. And of course, it was a really serious lie. And to the extent that the people believed him, or particularly his own members of his own family believed him, you know, that was in some ways making him complicit in the death of his own family, and that tormented him. And the novel traces his attempts and his many different lies that he tells, transformations of his character as he moves from Greece to Poland to try to see if he could connect with members of his family. The whole story is just fantastic to me. I mean it in the negative way. It's just so unrealistic. Why tell a story about the Holocaust that's so unrealistic? Were there Jews who were telling lies? Were there Jews who were complicit? Yes. In fact, there's a big controversy about the Jewish leadership in Salonika. None of that comes through here, really, in the book. There was a Jewish council, a Judenrate in Salonika, was headed by a rabbi. There's a lot of controversy about whether that whole community was complicit in the murder of their own community. Those are serious questions, and we have, you know, lots of information about that, about different communities, and we're all adults, and we should face those questions and understand that under extreme circumstances, people will do some things that they would never do under normal circumstances, and that everybody was a victim, and nobody really knew for sure what was going to happen. And again, that theme doesn't seem to me that theme is not fully developed by him. The you know, the truth tells us that what we're about to read in the story is absolutely true, but do we get a sense of the sort of fundamental nature of untruth that was pervasive of society, and the power of rumors and the desperation of people trying to desperately hold on to some possibility that there might be a better outcome to this, that it's not as bad as it seems? I don't know. Again, I don't think he manages to capture that for me. And then at the end, yes, of course, we know that there were thousands of Nazis who were protected by various communities after the war, particularly the Catholic Church and the so-called rat line that brought many of these Nazis to South America and also to the United States. And we know that, the early years of the Cold War, that our intelligence agencies, the CIA, were interested in these people and co-opted them and brought them in and used them for whatever information that they might have about the Soviet Union. And this is not a good chapter in our history. In the United States, that's all true. But I think the way that he describes that part of the story with with the character Udo making his way ultimately to the United States, connecting with a senator, I think that the senator's name was Carter. I can't tell you for sure that there were no senators who were actually, card-carrying neo-Nazis in the United States. Maybe there are, but I don't know. The story seems a little bit, again, contrived, even that part of it, and it was more complex than that. So, those are my. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Have I depressed everybody so far? The problem with what I'm saying is the book has sold millions of copies, and I know that millions of people love the book, probably many of you in this room. So I'm scratching my head and saying, wait a second, are all these millions of people wrong? Or am I wrong? And likely I am wrong, but I'm just giving you my point of view, right? I mean, that's all I can do here, giving you my point of view. And again, maybe I made this point already. I didn't sip yet, did I? Okay. Maybe I made this point already, but let me just say it again. I do worry. I don't know. Is this book being pitched to? I'm looking at you. Is this book being pitched to a high school aged young adult or whatever the age group would be? Is it, or is it just meant for everyone? And I just read it as if it seems to be pitched to a young adult audience. I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I did put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I have, for anyone who doesn't know, I do teen services here at the library too, and I didn't read this book, even though our committee did, because I just have a hard time reading Holocaust fiction depending on how my headspace is.
Yeah.
But I read, did you read Jerry Ellman's memoir? Jerry Ellman, he's local, and
Yeah.
so I had read that and I'd reviewed it for 585 magazine. And whenever I read like true researched accounts, I'm like, oh my gosh, why even write fiction when the harrowing truth, well written, is just, I mean, like that, the stories of his parents, how they survived the Holocaust. It's like basically a memoir, Jerry Ellman's memoir, but his parents were both survivors. It's just this astonishing, like spine tingling account. So if I'm like, I don't really need to read something made up, but my teen services and children's services brain is not going to give a child or a teen or tween Jerry Ellman's memoir. So I'm like, we do need some fiction because, as you were saying, there's not children's survivors who are also writers who, like you said, there's just that population of people who know the truth. Just there's not a lot of those people, and writing from the children's point of view is really important to children readers. So, I mean, that's why Anne Frank's diary is so powerful, and it's, the other couple of diary type books that children wrote that is just like, now as an adult reading it, I'm just like sobbing. When I read it as a kid, you're like, it's almost too much for your brain to handle as a kid to understand. So for kids novels and teen novels about the Holocaust, I think it is important to have a well-researched novel that features a child or a teen character. But like you said, it's how, you don't want there to be non-truths in it, even though by the fact of it being a novel, we know it's not true.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is being pitched. I actually have a Brighton High School book club I'm going to this afternoon, and I'm going to ask the librarian there. I'm curious. I don't know if it's being like marketed to that group. It doesn't seem like it based on sort of like the cover and things, but when there's a kid narrator, I could see people giving it to a high schooler.
Yeah.
So again, I don't have like a real answer, but
Yeah.
it's complicated, I think, when it comes to wanting to inform children and teens.
It is a complicated question, and again, I'm giving you one point of view, and it may not even be the best point of view. I do worry in a sense, if this is the only book or one of the only books that a person picks up on this subject. So I think about that. So let's, this is the book, or this is one of a couple of books that people will read on the Holocaust. Is this a representative book? Does it do it or not? And that worries me a little bit. Yeah, I think you've probably heard enough of my critique. What are some of the mistakes he makes, or his research staff makes? Well, see if I can even find it. When he describes the wolf, probably not going to be able to find it. So he never calls the wolf Hitler, obviously. I'm not going to be able to find it. Part of the problem is I didn't put any sticky notes here. He has a paragraph or two just explaining how the wolf came to be obsessed by Jews. So this is obviously a big subject. How did Hitler come to be obsessed by Jews and go down this path? And it's 3 or 4 paragraphs if you remember it in the book, and if anyone can find the page, that would be great. He says things that are not actually, that most historians of Hitler would not accept as true. He says that he was beaten often by his father, physically abused. Very simplistic 2 or 3 paragraphs on how Hitler came to be Hitler, or how the wolf came to be the wolf. You're writing a book, you can fill those things in. We know a lot. You don't have to say things that are actually not in the documented histories. There's no evidence that Hitler had an unusual childhood, different from tens and tens of thousands of other young males in Germany prior to World War I. A slight mention of Hitler's mother. Hitler's mother is incredibly important in the framing of Hitler and his identity. Not really mentioned, just mentioned, nothing, not developed. So that's sort of my point. Later on, he has a paragraph or two about the Romanis, the Roma and Sinti people, the Gypsies. And he says that Gypsies fit into I don't have the exact language in front of me, but Gypsies or Romani fit into the same category that Jews fit into in the Nazi racial hierarchy. That's, maybe this is the historian in me speaking. That's just not true. It's just not true. There was a racial hierarchy among Roma and Sinti people, but it was not the same. And yes, Roma and Sinti people were victims, and thousands of them were killed, but we don't actually know. It's not like the hundreds of thousands that he suggests in the book. Most likely that's not the number. Okay, is that a quibble? Is not that important? I don't know. Maybe it's not that important, but something that struck me is someone from my background. Get the story right, get the history right, as close as we can. Try to be as truthful as we can. If we're writing, in some ways, a parable about the Holocaust. So I'll stop here. I think we're about.
Yeah, we've got time. Comments or questions? Yeah.
And if I'm really interested in your disagreements.
Well, I read the book recently and I liked it, but having listened to you, I totally appreciate your perspective, and I'm seeing this book in a whole different light. But I'm also wondering, there's such a pervasiveness of probably thousands of untrue Holocaust novels out there that people are devouring like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think of, I'm sure you probably read the book People Love Dead Jews.
Yeah.
And there's a section in that book about the people who just love reading these books, but it's why? And they're reading probably a lot of it's truths and going, well,
yeah,
makes me feel better to read this book. They finally had a good life later on or whatever. But it's just I have a problem with that now, and I'm a voracious reader.
Yeah.
I've read many Holocaust books, so
it's a very interesting question, very interesting comment. I don't really have a good answer. I've thought about it myself. It's in many ways striking to me. So we're 80 years after the end of the Holocaust, and literally probably every day there are more than books published on the Holocaust, fictional books by the dozens, by the hundreds. Some of them very well written. For the most part, I don't read Holocaust fiction, except if somebody tells me you got to read this book and we're interested in your opinion, which I think friends of mine in the room have told me or asked me to do. It's a really interesting question. So is it that we have this hunger to there are two ways, at least two ways to look at it, probably more than two ways. Do we have this hunger? We have sort of a instinctive understanding that something really almost beyond human experience happened 75, 80 years ago, and we want to understand it, whether we're in the community of victims or not. It's the nature of evil itself. We're fascinated by evil. We want to understand it. So, we go to books, and good books, and, maybe very well written Holocaust fiction. Maybe there's a good reason why so many people are writing and reading these books. On the other hand, I think you used the word cathartic, or maybe I just imagined it. Are we reading these books because we want a kind of cathartic experience? We want to read, we want to feel a little bit, we want to cry a little bit, and then we get it out of our system and we're on to the next thing. Again, probably different for people inside or outside of communities that were directly affected. So it's an interesting question. I don't have a good answer. I am not, as I said, maybe I didn't finish the thought. I'm not agreeing with Elie Wiesel that if you were not there, you don't have the right to write about it. Because I don't think that's actually true. I think we have some brilliant writers, novelists, fiction writers who really can get inside a subject, deep inside the emotions, the psychology, the character development. They get their story, pretty much correct. I have no problem with those things. Even if I had a problem, it's going to happen anyway. So, what I do have a bit of a problem with is what I think is these sort of fantastic stories that are not as close to the truth as they could be, and maybe a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, just too much on the surface, just too much telling and not showing, so to speak.
I think one of the things, I really appreciate your opinions. I think perhaps if you are Jewish, you tend to read everything that comes out about the Holocaust. It doesn't mean others don't, but it means you've been inculcated since birth to your curiosity, your family background, or whatever. And part of the problem with this book is it is fiction. And when somebody is writing fiction, it is in their mode to do anything they want with the actual material.
Yeah.
It's not sold as the truth. And one of the things that, even though I like the book and I'm on the team and I wanted to have you here to do the book, the question is the narrator of truth. That bothered me because it was not truthful, in my opinion, in my reading experience. And the other thing was, teaching my whole life, elementary school, I felt badly that Nico, who told a lie without knowing it was a lie, destroyed his life. His life.
Mm-hmm.
The other people, they would have gotten on those trains. One way or the other, they were gone. But the fact that this child, who desperately needed therapy, who I wanted to immediately walk to some counselor, that drove me crazy for the whole book.
Yeah.
The narrator of truth destroying a child who felt he was telling the truth. So even though it was an interesting story, it bugged me. Now it bugs me more. But thank you for coming and sharing your opinions.
Sure, thank you.
I liked the book initially, and then discussing it with my husband, we decided very much as you had said, it didn't sit well. Maybe it's not, this question isn't fair because we're talking about this book, but I wondered how you would, a book like The Book Thief, which we're not reviewing here, so maybe it should be an answer, or a movie like Life is Beautiful. They were also fictitious, but I wondered how you would equate this one with those two fictitious accounts that
I like them better. I like them better. So I saw the movie Life is Beautiful several times, but the first time I saw it was with a Holocaust survivor. We just happened, we said, let's go see the movie. And, probably my instinct would have been not to like it, not to like Life is Beautiful, the film. But I saw how the Holocaust survivor sitting next to me liked it very, very much and felt that it touched something. I'm trying to get at the right word. I think Holocaust fiction has, the people who write Holocaust fiction have more responsibility than other fiction writers, in my opinion. And I don't think Mitch Albom lived up to that responsibility. One of the responsibilities you have is to kind of touch our emotions, or even touch our souls somehow, or give us some kind of an insight. So The Book Thief, Jacob the Liar, Life is Beautiful, the film, much better. And they deal with some of the same themes. Life is Beautiful. Of course, the main character is trying to keep children alive by telling them lies. Jacob the Liar is trying to tell the people in the Warsaw Ghetto, tells them lies to keep them going from Monday to Tuesday, from Tuesday to Wednesday, from Wednesday to Thursday. I'm not a Talmudic scholar, but I think the Talmud actually says that you can tell a lie in the name of alleviating suffering or in the name of peace. You can. It's not the same kind of a lie. I mean, it's a lie, but sometimes those lies have a very positive and outcome and need to be done. So it's not that the concept, like you say, of lying. I totally agree with you know, Nico was destroyed by that lie. And even at the end of the book, characters are saying, you know, you need a lot of psychological help, you know, and he did. But so are you kind of almost suggesting this in a way, kind of character child abuse? You know, you take a young boy and you manipulate him in such a way, and you create this scenario where you destroy his health, his mental well-being. Okay, that's an interesting. I hadn't exactly thought about it that way, but that's somebody who deals with, if young people are going to read this, so that the main character when we encounter him in the beginning is a young adolescent, but look what happens to the young adolescent. Is that what we want young people necessarily to I don't know, to experience through reading?
There's a lot of historical fiction now that, you know, the author's note has a disclaimer at the end. You know, this is a work of fiction, but then they'll often like thank their researchers and the author's note, and then they'll say, you know, any errors are my own, and they claim that, but they'll often, you know, disclose the facts that they changed, that they knowingly changed to fit the narrative. And I think that also, you know, sets it apart from if you're just like, it was researched and then, so I don't know, it's like often, you know, used like it's fiction, so I didn't have to get everything right. But if you're writing historical fiction without an obvious thing like, you know, a vampire appearing that, you know, makes the part seem fake, then yeah, it does seem like, just close in the end. So if you do, especially if you have children, teens, college students reading it, that then they'll get to the end, read that, and know that part, you should not quote that as fact.
When I finished reading it last night.
Here, can I pass her? Yeah.
Oops.
Here, let me pass you the mic. Here you go.
Sorry.
I finished reading it last night, and it occurred to me that I should know when this book was written. It was written it was published in 2023. And the reason I was so interested in that is that the book was splattered with indications of what's happening right now in our society. It just appalls me how truth is not truth anymore, and how people are believing alternative truths. I even thought of the fact that we have essentially a book burning going on right now within our government. And that is completely appalling. It makes one wonder, what does a citizen do about this? So this is what happened here. I think the book itself, I enjoyed reading it. I thought it was written for a general audience. It wasn't particularly written for people who are Holocaust survivors. I think it was written more toward a person who really isn't interested in delving into details, but it's important that the general theme is known. And I was a child during this time, and so it's very strong in my mind, but it's not strong. I know there's an effort to keep it going and should be kept going so people know, but I think in general, maybe this author's trying to make it easier for a general public who discovers that there's a book out there that's a good book on a bestseller list. I should read it, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, I don't know if I think that's a fair counter interpretation to mine. Absolutely fair. And I don't know what Mitch Albom's motivations were. Was he motivated to some degree by what was going on around the world at the time when he wrote the book? It's certainly possible.
I'm just gonna move your mic down.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I messed it
No,
up.
it's okay. All right, I think you're good.
Yeah, I can hear myself now. And I think you make a fair point that he wasn't actually trying to go in deep, because the millions of people who will be reading his book are not interested in going in deep, but he wanted to capture their attention enough so that they would know this story, even though it's a fictionalized version of some real stories. I mean, I think that's certainly a fair alternative interpretation. I'm not going to argue against it. I think that's reasonable. I don't, as I said, personally, I don't agree with it personally, but I can certainly see that. I have nothing against Mitch Albom. It's not a personal thing at all. I've never met him. Liked one book of his that he wrote, his most famous one, and didn't like this one particularly. And maybe I read a third one, something about 5 people you meet in a, yeah. So I've read 3, which is, it's not bad. Yes, sorry.
So I was sitting here, I'm thinking of what our kids are introduced to in school. And I know that my children read The Diary of Anne Frank, but they also read it at night as a school requirement, and Number of the Stars, which I think are all not bad representations. And then, like many of us here, I've read lots of fiction, but I remember being really excited when They Are the Lucky Ones came out, just because they all survived. It was fun. But I don't know how true that one was too. I mean, that was based on family history, and she went back and tried to investigate. But which books do you think fiction-wise are?
Well, I mean, I think the books that you just mentioned, I think I've read all of those books, and no, I haven't read we were the lucky ones, but they were the lucky. I know my wife read it, and she really liked it. So I sometimes or often, since I'm not reading a lot of historical fiction on the Holocaust, I am reading it through my wife's reading. She does a lot of that, and we talk about these books. Yeah, I would say all the books that you mentioned. By the way, I'm just starting a really interesting book that just came out, and you could say, well, what do we need another book on Anne Frank? And this is by Ruth Franklin, The Many Faces of Anne Frank. It's a really interesting book about a story that we all know, but we actually don't actually know it as well as we should know it. Even the diary itself. It's really 3 diaries. And Ruth Franklin is a professor of, I think she's a professor of literature, or maybe not. Maybe she's just a literary critic. And she does a real interesting deep dive into the biography of Anne Frank, the actual writing of the diary. Is it a diary, what we have? Is it actually a diary? It's a rewritten diary. So it's Anne Frank the writer, Anne Frank the young writer, reflecting on her own life from the diary that she actually wrote. If you understand a diary as sort of daily, comments or whatever, reflections on what happened in the day, she's rewriting that diary. So it's not, she's the author, clearly. And then what we've made Anne Frank into in our own minds and our own imaginations. So it's another way of looking at how some of these classical books, and I would agree, the Diary of Anne Frank is probably still the Holocaust memoir diary book that has been read by more human beings on earth than any other book, by far, I'm sure. And that's an interesting question in its own right. Why is that the case? You know. Anyway, yeah, I don't have. I agree with the selections that your kids were reading.
We can do one more question or comment. Does anyone have a last? No? Yes, all right, we'll go Bonnie, one last one. Wait for the mic, wait.
I'll make it. Would you
Wait.
personally be writing? Would you personally be writing to Mitch Albom about your opinion on this or not? No, I mean, I just wonder how far you would take this
No.
as a historian.
No, I wouldn't. You know, if someone asked me if there was some occasion to write about it, you know, I don't have an axe to grind with it. I would definitely not. If I had no. The answer is no. I think
I'm
yeah.
curious just in terms of, you know, you do hear of people who write to the author, and then the author actually establishes a communication network back and forth. And I mean, I'm just using judgment here, but I see you as so knowledgeable and compassionate passionate about this. I could see that he might want to communicate with you, is all I'm saying. Anyway, it's
I mean, you know, it's not in my personality, so I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing about my personality. That's not in my personality. If I ever encounter Mitch Albom and we have the opportunity to share a cup of coffee, I wouldn't be shy in telling him my opinion and interested to hear his response to it. You know, I have had the opportunity to speak to the late Elie Wiesel a number of times, and even to speak about Night with him a number of times. And it was very interesting to me that in some ways what happens, I think, with authors is it's not like giving birth to a child. So the child is yours for the rest of your life and the child's life, and you're still the mom or the dad of that child. You give birth to a novel or a memoir, and many writers, at least this was my sense of Elie Wiesel, he was, you know, he said, this was written, you know, actually written in several different versions and finally published in French and in English in 1959, 1960, and it stands on its own or doesn't stand on its own. He wasn't actually that interested in going back into that whole experience. So that was kind of an interesting experience for me.
you're off the hook.
I'm off the hook. Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.